Interrupting, let's talk about it. My wife had 3 of her college friends over last night, and I sat in on a little chat sesh, and it was fascinating. I learned something. And do you want to know what I learned? Stay tuned, let's go. What I learned is basically that women are different than men. I actually kind of knew that, but I really saw an interesting example of it this week. So we started talking about the universal principle of making people feel important, making people feel special, and then we got into a little bit minusculeness, the minutia of it by focusing on the interrupting side. Because as I'm watching these 4 ladies just gaggle amongst each other, and they're just excited. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and they're telling stories. Social distancing, of course. And they're all interrupting each other and talking over one another, and my brain is like exploding. And so I decided, I thought, should I say something? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to say it in a certain way, and I want to actually have this be a conversation piece. So conversation turned to me, and I introduced, and I said, how do you guys feel about this? And I literally asked the question, and I said, in general, it's this universal principle. We want to, make people feel special. Part of that is we don't want to interrupt them, because to me, whenever you interrupt somebody, in general, there are, as I'm learning, exceptions, but you're basically saying what I have to say is more important than the other. So I wanted to get their feedback, because I said, I noticed you girls interrupt each other all the time, and they had some very interesting feedback on that. One of the comments was, well, we don't like being interrupted at work. We don't like being interrupted by men, but when we're all together in a group, it's kind of part of the gig, and we all understand we're excited, we're interrupting each other, and it doesn't really bother us. And I said, well, hold on, I don't know if I quite buy that, because I think it depends on the type of interrupting that you're doing. So for instance, if somebody is telling a story and then they're close to the end, and then you have this, it's an old improv trick. It's called yes and. And if you sort of come in at the end and you say yes and then you go into your story, which relates to their story, but you maybe cut them off at the very end, to me that's okay, right? But if they're literally excited and they're telling their story about the monkey zoo, and this is the example I used last night. They were at the zoo and they saw this monkey and it was doing something really interesting. And they're like, oh, I want to tell you about what this interesting monkey was doing. And then one of the other people cuts them right off in mid-sentence and says, oh, but let me tell you about the car that I want to buy. Like, to me, there's no place in the universe where that's okay. And they kind of were like, yeah, we kind of agree with that. But at the same time, so we kind of talked a little bit, and then I let them go back to their talking, and I was just observing. And at first I could tell they were on their best behavior, because we'd just been talking about interrupting, and they weren't interrupting as much. But slowly but surely, I saw their bad habits, their failure interrupting habits start to creep in. And one of them I meant to mention, made the argument earlier that, well, we don't interrupt. Usually, it's usually the yes and. And if we do interrupt and cut somebody off, we usually circle back to that person. And I called BS on that too, because I said, do you know how many thoughts are lost to the universe because somebody interrupts them? And then another topic, because we're all ADD creatures these days. And then we go on another topic, and that's gone forever. And so sure enough, I saw one of the girls interrupt another. They switched topics. They started talking about something else. And so I kind of, when it got back to my turn to speak again, I said, so how did that make you feel? Like, how did that feel? And she's like, well, you're right. It did kind of feel crappy. So I'm still researching. I would love to get your feedback, listeners and viewers, on this topic. Like, do you think it is gender specific, or do you think in general, if you're interrupting somebody, it doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, you're at work, you're with one person, a group of people, it's all the same. You don't ever want to interrupt. Or do you feel like there's exceptions and that there's certain instances where it's okay? And I want to hear about those exceptions. I'm building my knowledge on this. This is interesting because I thought I had this one figured out. I'm going to have to change this chapter in my book. Can't wait to hear from you. See you next time.
Get moving. Build momentum. Join the movement. Go to moremomentum.com to take a free Life Evaluator Quiz on where you currently stand in each of your 5 cores.